Good morning, family. I hope everybody is doing well this morning. I hope everybody is staying safe. I hope everybody is staying aware. I hope everybody is being smart. It's been a couple of days since I've been with y'all, but a lot is going on. So there's a lot happening, and then there's actually nothing happening. But for all of you that are out there on the front lines that are protesting or taking a part in the protest or showing your support in whatever way you show your support by donating, signing petitions, doing what we're doing as far as alternative media is concerned, I want to say thank you, especially those on the front lines. We appreciate from the bottom of our hearts what you're doing, because the bottom line is we have accomplished more in the last 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks, than we have in the last 50, 60 years of voting. So just understand that, because that's what this little short, and I'm gonna try to make it short. That's what this video is gonna be all about. It's gonna be all about the difference between us rising up and rebelling against the system, and rising up and revolting against the system. The difference between that and 50, 60 years of compliance. Just complying, just being obedient, and voting for who they tell us to vote for, and voting for the lesser of two evils, which never works, because you're voting for the lesser of two evils, but you have to understand that you're still voting for evil. So it's not going to work for you either way, because you're still voting for evil. So, they'll tell you, well, you can't vote for the Republicans because the Republicans are racist. They hate black people. They don't want to do anything for black people. They don't want to support any black issues or any black agendas, or whatever the case may be. But then over here, you got the Democrats, who are the undercover racists. They're the ones who used to be undercover, who used to, make us all these promises and didn't keep them, who used to tell us what they're going to do this and they're going to do that and never did, until they came up with the benign neglect policy in the 60s. And since then, they just basically kind of ignore us. So, those are your two evils that you have to deal with. And then they tell you, well, you have to vote for the lesser of those two evils. Why do we have to vote for evil at all? Why do we have to vote for either party if that party is not looking out for our specific interests? And over the recent years, and because of very recent events, the Democrats have more and more and more and more and more come out and let it be known that they're not interested in our issues at all. They're not interested in supporting anything that has to do with the foundational Black American community. They're making that clear. Especially not anything that specifically pertains to us. You understand what I'm saying? When it comes to black folks, they'll throw out that word minority, or that word people of color, or that under marginalized communities, or underprivileged communities, or whatever. They'll throw out those words, and that and for black folks who still don't get it, that'll make you think that they're talking about you, but they're not offering anything specific for black folks, and they're still not. So this little stunt that they pulled yesterday or whatever, when they were going around with these Kente cloths on, you got Nancy Pelosi and a few other ones going around with these Kente cloths on, and kneeling up in the chamber and all of this kind of stuff. Don't be fooled by that. Don't be fooled by that, because that means absolutely nothing. Why? Because I've read the new bill that they have come out with, that the Democrats have proposed for this so-called police reform, or whatever. I've read it, and we'll go over it in a few minutes. And it's just basically a whole bunch of nothing. It's just basically a whole bunch of words, a whole bunch of nothing. Okay, so in foundational Black Americans, you need to understand that. You understand what I'm saying? You need to understand that we didn't get to the point where we are right now, where folks are actually sitting down writing legislation and actually taking us serious. You got Black Lives Matter painted on the street leading up to the Capitol. And they've changed the name of it to Black Lives Matter Plaza. Also in North Carolina, I think it's Raleigh or one of those cities. They've got End Racism or something like that painted on one of the cities. So you got police officers and police chiefs all over the country taking a knee and kneeling and all of this kind of stuff. But this stuff right now is just symbolism. It doesn't mean a whole lot right now. It's visually satisfying, but it doesn't mean a whole lot. Yeah, it's just they're just symbols. They don't mean anything because they don't have any substance. There's no real substance until you start actually talking about punishing these police officers, punishing them for their brutality, punishing them for their excessive use of force, punishing them for their excessive use of lethal force and deadly force against unarmed Black Americans. So until people start talking about punishment, not these symbolic bills where they're talking about, oh, they're going to start a special department so they can investigate this. And then they're going to start a special department so they can look into this. And all. We don't need any more investigation. We don't need any more study into anything. We need action now. And action includes punishment. Punishment for these folks. They didn't have any problem right now. And remember now, again, these were Democrats that did this. They didn't have any problem right now with the 1994 crime bill. They didn't have any problem right now with that 1986 drug bill that made this huge disparity between crack cocaine and powder cocaine. They don't have any problem right now. These specific laws where they specifically talk about the punishment Black folk, mainly Black folks, will receive if this crime is committed, or if they say you committed that crime, or if they can convict you of this. They don't have any problem specifically writing out the punishment. But in none of these bills that I have researched over the last few days, in none of these bills are they talking about any kind of punishment against these police officers. They're not talking about punishment against these prosecutors who go through all of this stuff and help these folks cover up things and all of that. They're not talking about any kind of specific punishment. And that's what we need. We don't need any more symbology. We don't need any more symbolic gestures. You understand what I'm saying? We don't need any more hugs. We don't need any more kisses. We don't need any more people taking knees and all of this kind of stuff. And that knee that you take doesn't show up in legislation towards punishing these folks. Because you still got Breonna Taylor's murderers, those three police officers walking around free. You got all of that police misconduct and all of that prosecutorial misconduct in the Ahmaud Arbery case, where for 2 months the police and the prosecutors and all that did everything that they could to cover this thing up. You understand what I'm saying? Look at the Central Park 5. And they found out all of that misconduct was going on in the prosecutor's office. But this woman has never been charged with any kind of misconduct. That white woman who was the prosecutor at the time has never been charged with any kind of prosecutorial misconduct. I don't even think they investigated her. You know, and all of this talking about, well, special prosecutors coming in and the FBI going to come in and investigate this and that. And the DOJ, the Department of Justice, going to come in and investigate this. That's just the police still investigating the police. So if all you're doing is offering us more legislation that includes more investigation, okay, we've had enough investigating. We've had enough with all of these different agencies coming in to investigate. And then at the end of the day, after they've investigated, they come back and they tell us, oh, well, we don't find anything wrong here. We don't find where the police officer did anything wrong. And they still walk. No, we need legislation that's going to be to the point about the crime and the punishment. When you kill, as a police officer, when you kill an unarmed black person, that's a crime, period. You are automatically charged with first-degree murder. And then we get into the punishment phase. How much time you gonna get if you're found guilty? It's just that simple. We start there. And then we start going down the list with the use of excessive force and all of that kind of stuff. You start going down the list. But you start with what happens if it's a case where you kill, where you murder an unarmed black person. Because if that person is unarmed, then there was no need for that deadly force that was used. But let's get into some of this. Let's get into some of this stuff that's being proposed right now, and some of this stuff, this legislation that they supposed to be throwing out here on us. That's simply meant, all it's meant to do is to trick you and to lure you back into sleep. You understand? To pacify you, to make you feel like, yeah, there's some change and things are changing when they're not. Protesters, please don't stop. Please don't lose your momentum. Understand that your voices are being heard, and not just here in the United States, but around the world. You understand what I'm saying? The call has been made, and folks have risen to the cause. And it's our responsibility to make sure that what's going on this end supports what you're doing out there on the front lines. And it's our responsibility to make sure that other foundational Black Americans know what's really going on, know what they're really proposing, so that all of your work that you've done on the front lines won't go in vain. It won't be done in vain. Because if we fall for some of these same tricks that we've been falling for the last 50, 60 years, then it's going to be even worse for us when this is all said and done than it was before the protests ever started. So foundational Black Americans, pay attention. Don't let them keep ushering out these black folks like these members of the Congressional Black Caucus and all of that. And these black puppet politicians and all that. Don't let them keep sending them out to you, offering you crumbs when the whole table belongs to you. They're offering you crumbs from your own table. And we've got to be determined that we're not settling for crumbs. Because it can't get no worse for us than it already is. They're already killing us in the street. With impunity, with immunity. You understand what I'm saying? So it can't get no worse than that. So if we stick to our guns and stand on our square, it can't get no worse. But let's break these bills down. You understand what I'm saying? And let's see what's really in them. Let's see if they really have any meat and potatoes in them, or if they're just symbolic. If they're just a bunch of bills that's full of just a bunch of words that add up to nothing. Okay? So the first one that we want to get into is they just passed in New York. They just passed the, let me get down here to it. They just passed the Eric Garner Anti-Chokehold Act. And that was Senate Bill S6670B in New York. And this legislation, the Eric Garner Anti-Chokehold Act, sponsored by Senator Brian Benjamin, will prohibit the use of chokeholds by law enforcement and establish the crime of aggravated strangulation as a Class C felony. Okay, well, that bill was actually passed. That actually was passed into law. Okay? When it's a bill, it's just being introduced. It's not law yet. It's just being introduced to go through the process that it has to go through. You know, it has to pass the House, and then after it's passed the House, then it has to be voted on in the Senate and all of this kind of stuff. That's state and federal. So it has to go through a process as a bill. When it's first introduced, it has to go through this process before it becomes a law. And it has to be passed by the majority, and it has to pass the House and the Senate. And that's state and federal. Okay, well, this has become a law now, which means it will go down in the law books. Okay, and again, it was Senate Bill S6670B in New York State, and it's called the Eric Garner Anti-Chokehold Act, and it was sponsored by Senator Brian Benjamin. And again, it will prohibit the use of chokeholds by law enforcement and establish the crime of aggravated strangulation as a Class C felony. Okay, now strangulation by a police officer. So you're being strangled, aggravated strangulation. You're being strangled by a police officer, but it's going to only be a Class C felony. Okay, so let's go see what a Class C felony in New York State looks like. Okay, let's go see what that looks like. and you can Google it. Just Class C felony New York State. You can Google it and it'll come up. New York State felony classes and sentences. Offenses, on one side they have offenses, on the next side they have sentences. Okay, Class C has two different types. Class C felonies, the Class C offense, the felony has one Class C violent felony, and then it has the Class C non-violent felony, right? The violent felony, if you're convicted of a Class C violent felony, you get anywhere from 3.5 to 15 years. If you're sentenced for a Class C non-violent felony, you get no jail time. You get probation, a year to 2 years, up to 15 years, right? That's Class C non-violent. Class C violent, 3.5 to 15 years. Okay. So let's go back, since this bill was named after Eric Garner. Let's go back and let's look at his case. Pantaleo, which was the police officer that put him in the chokehold and held him there while he kept saying he couldn't breathe. Okay, so basically this man strangled him out. This was aggravated, according to this bill that has now been passed into law. This man, it was aggravated strangulation. This man strangled him, and because of that strangulation, he died. Right? Okay. Right now, if they went back, which they need to do, they need to put this in some of these bills and all of this so-called reform and all of this legislation. They need to put some verbiage in there so that we can go back and pull back some of these old cases. It needs to be retroactive, which means it needs to go back and pull up some. You understand what I'm saying? Well, in that case, if they were to now go back into this case, since they have this bill, if they were to go back into this case and pull it back, he could only be charged with a Class C, a violent felony or a non-violent. Okay, well, since it's aggravated strangulation, that's violent, right? Because it actually includes some kind of physical confrontation with another human being. So that's violent. He would only get 3.5 to 15 years. And you just choked out somebody. So what kind of punishment is that? But that's the only, in all of this stuff that New York is proposing right now, that's the only actual thing that has that's the only actual piece of legislation that they've written that actually has any kind of punishment in it. It doesn't say anything about killing an unarmed black person. It doesn't say anything about killing an unarmed person, period. It doesn't say anything about punishment. It doesn't say anything about prosecution. It doesn't say anything about these folks are to be arrested and charged and convicted to the full extent of the law. It doesn't say any of that. This is the only part of this initial proposal, because they've got a whole lot of them in there, and I'm going to read them all to you. But this is the only one, the one where it actually talks about banning the chokeholds. This is the only one that actually makes it a criminal offense and lists any kind of punishment. The chokehold doesn't say anything about, excessive force. Doesn't say anything about deadly force. Doesn't say anything, like I said, about if you kill an unarmed person or what. None of that. Doesn't mention any legislation on any of that. Okay? So this is the one that has passed so far. Okay? Out of all of these bills that they have, because they have about 5 of them. And again, this is New York State. Out of all of these bills, this is the only one that talks about any kind of turning anything into a criminal offense and any punishment attached to it. And this one has passed. But you have to remember, when Eric Garner was killed, when he was murdered, there was already a ban against chokeholds in New York City. There was already a ban against it. You understand what I'm saying? So everybody's trying to put this chokehold and banning chokeholds and all of that into their legislation when there were already states that had banned the use of chokeholds prior to any of this. Okay? And now you have, let's see, of course, New York lawmakers have banned it. You got folks in Missouri talking about banning chokeholds. I'm just going to list some of the states. Denver Police Department bans chokeholds. California is banning chokeholds. Who else? Okay, Minneapolis has banned the chokehold. So you got states all over the country that are already banning chokeholds. Already banning them. So there's nothing great about this. Like I said, chokeholds have been banned by police departments for years, but they're still using them. At the time of Eric Garner's death, that particular chokehold was banned in New York City, but you see, he was still using it. So see, a lot of this stuff that they're talking about doing, there are already laws on the books to cover this stuff. But they're not enforcing the laws, especially not when it's a white police officer or a police officer against especially somebody black, or when it's anybody white against somebody black. These laws are already on the books. They're just not enforcing them. It's no good to keep putting laws on the books if nobody is going to enforce them. A law is only as good as whoever's enforcing it. If that law is not being enforced, it's no good. Okay, so let's go back and let's look at some more stuff that's in this bill in New York. Because, everybody wants to make this big to-do out of this Amy Cooper bill that they're supposed to be coming up with. That's this false 911 call. Okay, but you do understand most states already have a law on the books that says that you cannot make a false report, that you cannot make a false police statement. You understand what I'm saying? That you cannot make false accusations to the police about people. You can't do false 911 calls and make false claims against people and false police reports and all this kind of stuff. Those laws are already on the books in most states, but they're not enforcing them. Now remember what happened to Jesse Smollett. Remember what happened to Jesse Smollett when they finally realized that he had made a false 911 call. He had made these false claims and all of this kind of stuff. Look at all the stuff that they hit Jesse Smollett with. Look at all the charges they hit him with. But Amy Cooper has not been charged yet. And now they're going to try to tell us that they need a special law to charge Amy Cooper, when the law is already on the books. All they got to do is enforce it. Okay, so let's look through this. This is coming from NewYorkSenate.gov. And Senate Majority advances policing reforms legislative package. Okay, this was June 8th, 2020. Albany, New York. The Senate Majority will advance a major policing reforms legislative package, which includes the repeal of 50A and other important bills to help implement real improvements to law enforcement efforts in New York. Last year, a public hearing was held to examine the repeal of Section 50A of the Civil Rights Law as part of the Senate Majority's ongoing commitment to reforming the justice system. Now, you got to understand, a lot of this stuff was proposed back in 2018. Before Ahmaud Arbery, before Breonna Taylor, before George Floyd. So none of this stuff is actually a result of the protests and the uprising and the rebellion. None of this is none of this stuff that they got now is specifically because of that. They want to try to act like it's because of that, but no. A lot of this legislation was already introduced back in 2018. Recent national events surrounding the deaths of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd have highlighted the immediate need for these reforms. The implementation of these policing reforms will help the healing process for minority communities. There they go again, minority communities. Minority communities are not the ones being affected. The black community is the one that's being affected. And see, you have to understand the reason why these people have such a hard time saying black is because some of us as black folks have such a hard time saying black. We want to use this mess talking about people of color and minorities and underprivileged communities and marginalized communities. We want to use that language. So we have made it very, very comfortable for them to use that language and just instead of just being specific. Black, we need some stuff that's specifically for us now. Because we are the ones being killed in the street. We are the ones that are being brutalized the most by police officers. The brutality that you see going on now, all of this white against white brutality, these white police officers against white folks, well, the reason why you're seeing that is because with all the attention, they at this particular time, they can't do it like they're used to doing it, which is approaching black folks and brutalizing black folks in the street and killing black folks in the street. So you have to understand, white supremacy is going to have its outlet. It's going to have its outlet. White supremacy is going to do what it do. Now, it would prefer to do it to black folks. But if it can't do it to black folks, then eventually it'll do it to white folks, Asians, Hispanics, whoever comes next. But white supremacy is going to act itself out. That's what white people need to understand. White people need to understand that their privilege only lasts as long as white supremacy has black folks as a target. But when black folks are no longer available to be that target, white supremacy is still going to act itself out. And that's when white folks lose their privilege. Understand, white people, you only have your white privilege as long as white supremacy can target black people. But when black people are no longer available, white supremacy will target whoever they have to target. Because at this point, it's a bloodlust. At this point, it's a sickness. At this point, white supremacy is like a vampire system. It's got to have that blood. And if it can't get blood from its preferred victim, it's going to get blood from somewhere. And it don't matter who else. So that's what white folks need to understand. You need to understand how very iffy your privilege really is. Because your privilege is not based on anything solid. It's not based on anything real. It's based on this lie called white supremacy. That's what your privilege is based on. Your privilege is based on the ability of white supremacy to hold black people down and keep black people down and victimize and target and attack black people. But when that is no longer possible, for whatever reason, for however long, because white supremacy has to victimize somebody. Somebody has to be the victim of white supremacy. It's a vampire. It's got to have blood from somewhere to survive. So if it can't get its blood from its preferred victim, it's going to get some blood from somewhere. That's the reason why you seeing videos of white folks attacking white folks. You seen, I'm sure y'all seen the video of the man on the bicycle with the bicycle helmet on and all of this, and he's attacking these white folks, and he actually goes and attacks a little white girl, pulling papers all out of her hand and all of that. That was assault. Well, this guy, they say this guy was the CEO of this big company and all of this. He was, he was more affluent, lived in an affluent neighborhood and all of that. Well, that vampire, white supremacy, that's in his system, that's inside of him. Because that vampire couldn't attack somebody black, or because that vampire, that need for blood was not being satisfied by watching black folks be attacked and watching black folks be victimized. Okay, that white supremacy, that vampire had to get some satisfaction from somewhere. So since he couldn't find anybody else, it turned on its own. And if you think white supremacy won't turn on you, when you see those police officers in Buffalo, New York, push that old 75-year-old man down, that was because that white supremacy beast had to have a victim. Had to have a victim. Had to see blood flow. Had to have some violence. Well, since they couldn't perpetrate that violence on somebody black because of all the attention, because of everything that's going on, because of the protests, the riots, the uprising, the rebellion, it had to find somebody. So it made a victim out of that old 75-year-old white man. You see the video of the police officer that was standing behind this woman, and you could actually see him grope her, and she fought him off and all of that. The next thing you know, they were hitting her on her back, on her legs, on her side, and everything with batons and brought her down. There were no black women to attack. There were no black victims. There was nobody black around. And like I said, because of the climate, because of the situation, they had to be careful not to specifically go after black folks, but they still had to have that violence. White supremacy still had to have that violence that brings about control. So they turned on white women. So that's what you white Americans need to understand. You need to understand that your privilege in this system of white supremacy, this demonic beast system of white supremacy, your privilege is only there because there's somebody else for white supremacy to victimize and attack and perpetrate its violence and its control over. But now that it ain't cool, it ain't safe to go after black folks, now they coming after white folks. All right. Let's get back to reading this. Let me find my spot. Recent national events surrounding the deaths of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd have highlighted the immediate need for these reforms. The implementation of these policing reforms will help the healing process for minority communities. There we go again. Remember, it's not minority, it's black communities that have been disproportionately targeted, and will facilitate better partnerships between law enforcement and the New Yorkers they serve. So let's get into these bills. Okay, you got Senate Bill S 8496. This legislation, sponsored by Senator Jamal Bailey, will repeal Section 5A of the Civil Rights Law that provides additional protections to the personnel records of police officers, firefighters, and correctional officers. This protection has been interpreted to include disciplinary records of law enforcement officers. This repeal would subject these records to FOIL. What is FOIL? The Freedom of Information Law. Just as all other records kept by public agencies, while protecting the sensitive personal contact and health information of these officers. Now, that's a good one. That's a good one, because people need to be able to go in, and you need to be able to search these records, especially the disciplinary records of individual officers. So now this is a good one. This is a good one, okay? The next one is Senate Bill S2574B. This legislation, sponsored by Senator Jamal Bailey, will create an Office of Special Investigation within the Department of Law under the Attorney General, which will investigate and, if warranted, prosecute any incident of a person whose death was caused by a police officer or peace officer. Right? That one needs to be a little bit more specific, and it needs to add in more very specific words as far as the kind of incidents that are going to be investigated. You understand what I'm saying? And the kind of charges that could be brought. You know, it says a person whose death was caused by a police officer. Okay, caused how? A firearm, excessive use of force, excessive use of deadly force, or whatever. Okay, what kind of prosecution are we talking about? You know, what kind of punishment are you talking about? That one needs to be a little bit more specific. It's a little too broad. It's a little too vague, especially with all this talking about investigating and all of that. Okay, well, we done had quite enough of investigating. You understand what I'm saying? Now, if it's questionable, you know, you got one person's word against another. Okay, yeah, you go in and investigate. But nowadays, we got too much video footage for there to be all of this investigation, especially if this person, this individual, is unarmed. So that one needs to be a little bit more specific, and it needs a little bit more as far as what kind of charges we're talking about, what kind of offenses we're talking about, what kind of punishment we're talking about. That needs to be a little bit more specific. Okay, then they got Senate Bill S3253B. This legislation, sponsored by Senator Kevin Parker, will clarify that a person not under arrest or in custody has the right to record police activity and to maintain custody and control of that recording of any property or instruments used to record police activities. So I like that one, because it's making it clear that if I'm not the person that's being arrested, you understand what I'm saying? If I'm not in custody at the time, I got a right to videotape you. And I got a right to hold on to not only that videotape, but I've got a right to hold on to my phone or whatever a device I use to videotape you. But that bill needs to add that if this person's right is violated, and that phone is taken away from them, or they're told by law enforcement that they can't be videotaping, or whatever the case may be, there should be an offense attached to that for the police officer, and that offense should have some type of punishment. So don't just tell me that I have a right to do this and that I have a right to film, that I have a right to keep the custody and the control of my recording, and I have a right to keep my phone or whatever device I used to record. Don't just tell me I have a right to do that. Tell me what happens to a police officer if he violates that right, if he takes that right away from me. Tell me the punishment, the crime that he'll be charged with committing, and the punishment for that. Because they do it all the time. They threaten people. They tell people that they don't turn off the phone, they're going to do this, that, and the other. They're going to arrest them too. There have been people arrested for filming police officers. So don't just tell me I have this right. Tell me what happens if a police officer, if law enforcement violates that right. What kind of crime will they be charged with? What's the punishment for them violating that right? Senate Bill S6670B. This legislation, the Eric Garner Anti-Chokehold Act, which we know now has been passed into law. So that's no longer a bill, that is now law. Okay? And remember, it's the only one right here in this list that I'm getting ready to read off, that I'm reading off now. It's the only one that actually establishes a crime. And it establishes the crime of aggravated strangulation. And it's the only one that talks about any form of punishment. Any form of punishment. Okay? Let's go to the next one. Senate Bill S3595B. This legislation, sponsored by Senator Kevin Parker, will establish the Law Enforcement Misconduct Investigative Office within the Department of Law to review, study, audit, and make recommendations regarding operations, policies, programs, and practices of local law enforcement agencies. The goal of this legislation is to enhance the effectiveness of law enforcement, increase public safety, protect civil liberties and civil rights, ensure compliance with constitutional protections and local, state, and federal laws, and increase the public's confidence in law enforcement. So basically, you can scratch that one, because all that is just a bill to investigate misconduct. That's because that's all it's going to do. It says all it's going to do is review, study, audit, and make a recommendation. You know, so you can scratch that one, because that one, they already doing that. They already doing that. They already have internal affairs and all of these kind of offices and departments inside of law enforcement that are supposed to do just that, but they're not doing it. So, and this is just going to be another department. You understand what I'm saying? Another office within the Department of Law. So it's already going to be within the department that is already within. So it's, you know, and all it's going to do is review, study, and audit. So what's the point? We done had enough of studies. Like I said, black folks are tired of studies. We're tired of studies. We're tired of reviews. You understand what I'm saying? We're tired of all of that. We're tired of all of these bodies and all these commissions and all these offices and all these committees that are just being set up to review this and study that and make recommendations, and ain't nothing getting done. Because those recommendations never lead to any real action. So they can scratch this one. Senate Bill S1830C. This legislation, sponsored by Senator Brad Howman, the Police Statistics and Transparency Act, will require courts to compile and publish racial and other demographic data of all low-level offenses, including misdemeanor and violations. The bill also requires police departments to submit annual reports on arrest-related deaths to be submitted to the Department of Criminal Justice Services and the governor and the legislature. Do we need any more data? I mean, really, do we need any more data? No, we don't need any more collection of data, because that's all this is about, collecting data. We don't need any more collection of data. We don't need any more collection of information that's being passed among these folks in law enforcement. Now, if you want to collect this data and put it out there in the public so the public can see all of this, that's fine. But just data to be passed around from one law enforcement agency to another law enforcement agency, we don't need no more of that. We need action. We need police officers fired, arrested, and charged with brutality, murder, aggravated assault, whatever, and punished. We don't need no more data transference, okay? Senate Bill S-8492. This legislation, sponsored by Senator Kevin Parker, establishes a private right of action for a member of a protected class when another person summons a police or peace officer on them without reason to suspect a crime or an imminent threat to person or property existed. So this is basically right here what they're calling this Amy Cooper bill right here. Right? So it gives the person who is a member of the protected class, okay, and it doesn't specify who's a member of the protected class. Who is the protected class? It doesn't specify. Okay, so we need for that to be specified, who the actual protected class is. And don't just put minority in there. Because when you put minority in there, you're including LGBT people, you're including white females, you're including Asian Americans, Hispanic Americans, and they already fall under protections. They already protected, especially in New York. In New York, if you call somebody an illegal alien, you can be fined thousands and thousands of dollars. You see what I'm saying? So they're already protected. So this S-8492, and this is, like I said, this is the so-called Amy Cooper bill. It needs to specify who is the protected class. Because Amy Cooper was very, very specific when she talked to that black man, and she let him know when she called the police, she was going to tell the police specifically that an African American man was threatening her. So this bill needs to be just that specific, just as specific as she was. Who is a member of the protected class? What is this protected class? Okay, now you have given me a right of action as a member of this protected class. If somebody calls the police on me or whatever, and makes it act like I'm doing a crime, or I'm posing as a immediate threat to somebody or whatever. So you give me, as a member of the protected class, a right of action. But what are you going to do to that person that actually picked up the phone and called against me? What are you going to do? What crime are they going to be charged with? You understand what I'm saying? And what's going to be the punishment? Because this says absolutely nothing about the person who made the fake 911 call, or the person who made this fake summoning of the police or whatever. You don't say anything about what's going to happen to them. So this got to be broader, and it's got to be more specific in that it specifically spells out who is the protected class, and it's got to specifically spell out, okay, thank you for giving me a right of action, or you know what I'm saying, but what's going to happen to that person who has summoned the police on me without any reason? What's going to happen to that person that's made that fake 911 call, or whatever the case may be? What crime are they going to be charged with? And what's going to be the punishment? Okay, the next one is Senate Bill S6601A. This legislation, sponsored by Senator Jamal Bailey, will amend the civil rights law by adding a new section that affirms New Yorkers' right to medical and mental health attention while in custody. Okay, that's a good one. But we're not talking about all New Yorkers. You understand what I'm saying? We're talking about black folks. Black folks are the ones that are being affected most by all of this stuff that's going on with law enforcement, police brutality, murdering black folks, all of this. So now if you want to add something, I would suggest that you say, by adding a new section that affirms New Yorkers, comma, especially African American New Yorkers, the right to medical and mental health attention while in custody. See, this stuff needs to be specific to us. Senate Bill, we got two more. Senate Bill S8493. This legislation, the New York State Police body-worn cameras program, sponsored by Senator Kevin Parker, will direct the Division of State Police to provide all state police officers with body-worn cameras that are to be used anytime an officer conducts a patrol, and prescribes mandatory situations when the camera is to be turned on and recorded. Okay, Senate Bill S2575B. This legislation, sponsored by Senator Jamal Bailey, will require state and local law enforcement officers as well as peace officers to report within 6 hours when they discharge their weapon where a person could have been struck, whether they were on or off duty. I agree with that one. So that's just a breakdown of the whole package of police reform that the Senate majority in New York State is trying to get passed. And they have already passed into law the Aragona Act. And like I said, that's the only one that actually mentions any kind of specific crime and punishment, any kind of specific charge that the police officer could get, and the punishment. All the rest of them, just bullshit words. You understand what I'm saying? Just bullshit words. So New York, you need to understand, those in New York, those who live in New York and all this, you need to understand what these bills entail and how specific they are and whether or not they speak to the specific problem that black Americans have in New York with police brutality. Okay, now that's that for what's going on as far as the state of New York. And a lot of people subscribe that if New York can get certain things passed and if New York can get certain things popping, then that will affect the entire East Coast. Just like on the other side with California, when California gets certain things popping and certain things take place in California, it affects the whole West Coast. So if we can get, some of this stuff rewritten like it needs to be rewritten, specific to the situation that black people are in, and specific to, okay, what are we going to do about punishment? What are these police officers, what are these people going to be charged with, and what's going to be the punishment if they violate this stuff? You understand what I'm saying? What's going to be the punishment if you violate my right to film you and to hold on to my phone or the video that I recorded or whatever device I recorded you on? What's going to happen to you? What's going to be your crime? What are you going to be charged with? What's going to be the punishment for you as law enforcement if you violate my right? If you make a fake 911 call or you call the police on me for no reason, first of all, we need to know who that protected class is. That needs to be spelled out specifically who that protected class is. And then we need to specifically know what that person who has made this fake 911 call or whatever, we need to know the exact crime that they're going to be charged with and the punishment. So see, none of this stuff is specific enough, because it doesn't talk about actually punishing anybody for violating these rights. for taking my right away from me. It doesn't actually talk about punishing anybody. That's what we need now. We need what you're going to be charged with, how you're going to be punished. See, all of these reviews, all of these investigations, all of this kind of stuff, just throwing this stuff out here, you know, quote unquote protected class, and not explaining and not specifying who that protected class is. And that's just too broad. And Dr. Claude Anderson has been warning us for years about all of these broad and ambiguous terms and all of this broad and ambiguous language that's not specific enough, and is certainly not specific to foundational Black Americans. Okay? So that's what's going on in New York. Now, let's see what's going on with what these Democrats got going on. Because like I said, everybody done seen them walking around with their Kente cloths on. Nancy Pelosi and some of the rest of them walking around with their Kente cloths on and taking a knee. All of this symbolism and all of this bullshit. You putting on a Kente cloth don't mean jack. You putting on a Kente cloth don't mean jack. You understand what I'm saying? It don't mean that you support us. It don't mean that you have our best interest at heart. It don't mean that you're getting ready to write some legislation that's specific for us, that specifically talks about how these police officers are going to be punished for the crime of the brutality against us, beating us, killing us in the street, killing these unarmed Black folks. You wearing a Kente cloth don't mean jack. That ain't nothing but symbolism. That ain't nothing but optics. But we got to see if it has any substance. We got to see if this bill that you have introduced as far as police reform is concerned, if it has any substance. I mean, down here in North Carolina, we had folks, I believe it was in Asheville. We had folks in Asheville, I believe it was Asheville. It was either Asheville or Durham. These white folks was down here on their knees in front of Black folks asking for forgiveness and all that, and talking about they washing their feet and all that kind of stuff. That don't mean nothing. That don't mean nothing. Are you going to share your wealth with me? You understand what I'm saying? Are you going to get up off your white privilege? You understand what I'm saying? And share some of that wealth and some of that position with me. Because you just down there in front of me talking about you washing my feet. I can go home and wash my own feet. But you washing my feet is not going to change the environment where every day when I go out or every day when I send my Black children out, I got to wonder about whether or not they're going to have a deadly encounter with white supremacist police officers. So all that you talking about forgiveness and all of that ain't changing my situation none. So Black people, we have got to stop falling for the bullshit. We have got to stop falling for these people playing on our emotions, playing on our kindness, playing on our morality, playing on the fact that we have always been the moral conscience of this country. We have always been the ones to do the forgiving and the ones to try to help everybody else and the ones to cape for everybody else and the ones to have to, to help uplift everybody else while ain't nobody doing nothing for us. Ain't nobody uplifting us. We've got to stop allowing them to play on that part of us. Because this ain't no game. I don't need my feet washed. I need to be able to go out and send my children out and not have to worry about police brutality, not have to worry about white folks killing them in the street, not have to worry about my children going to school and being abused by white resource officers and white teachers and all of this kind of. That's what I need. I don't need my feet washed. And I don't need your forgiveness. If your forgiveness ain't nothing but a bunch of words and it's not backed with any real action, you can keep your forgiveness to yourself. So let's see what these Kente cloth wearing folks, let's see what the kind of stuff they have put in their so-called bill. Now I got this from Judicial House Gov, and they don't have the document yet because it just came out. They just did this press release a couple of days ago, June 8th. They haven't even gave it the House resolution. They haven't even given it a number yet. As of when this came out. And as of yesterday, when I actually read the bill, they haven't even given it a number yet, because every House resolution is HR, like HR 40, HR 6666, and they haven't even given it a number yet. Hold on, y'all. That's my... So let's see what they're talking about. Yeah, they haven't even given it a number yet. But like I said, this is in judiciary.house.gov. Press release. Chair Bass, Senators Booker and Harris, and Chair Nadler introduced the Justice in Policing Act of 2020. So we got Cory Booker and Kamala Harris. All of a sudden, Cory Booker and Kamala Harris, who ain't gave a shit about black folks when they were running for president. Kamala Harris then put it out there and made it clear. You understand what I'm saying? Is she going to do anything specifically for black people? No. Cory Booker certainly didn't have anything to offer other than some baby bonds. Okay? So these are the people that are backing and releasing this Justice in Policing Act. Now, this is coming from the Democrats. Okay? So let's read this. Hold on, y'all. Let me give me a little sip. Washington, D.C. Today, Congressional Black Caucus Chair Karen Bass, they really need to get rid of her. Senators Cory Booker and Kamala Harris and House Judiciary Committee Chair Gerald Nadler introduced the Justice in Policing Act of 2020, the first ever bold, comprehensive approach to hold police accountable, change the culture of law enforcement, and build trust between law enforcement and our communities. Okay, first of all, I read it. There's nothing bold about it. You understand what I'm saying? It doesn't hold police accountable, and it doesn't change anything. And it certainly is not, there's certainly not anything in the bill that I read that's going to build any trust between law enforcement and black communities. Okay, then it has the statements that they've made. Chair Bass, this is Karen Bass. What we are witnessing is the birth of a new movement in our country, with thousands coming together in every state marching to demand a change that ends police brutality, holds police officers accountable, and calls for transparency. For over 100 years, she said over 100 years, black communities in America have sadly been marching against police abuse and calling for the police to protect and serve them as they do others. Today, we unveil the Justice in Policing Act, which will establish a bold, transformative vision of policing in America. Never again should the world be subjected to witnessing what we saw on the streets in Minnesota with George Floyd. Because then it's a statement from Cory Booker, then it's a statement from Kamala Harris, then it's a statement from this Gerard Nadler person. I ain't interested in these statements. Okay, now, I'm not going to read the whole entire bill, right? Because it's long, and it's a whole bunch of judicial, legal, political words that mount up to nothing. Just a whole bunch of talk, a whole bunch of words that mount up to nothing, okay? But this is the points that they say they make in the Justice in Policing Act of 2020. Prohibits federal, state, and local law enforcement from racial, religious, and discriminatory profiling, and mandates training on racial, religious, and discriminatory profiling for all law enforcement. So there is a section in there where they talk about racial profiling, right? They say absolutely nothing about what kind of crime a law enforcement officer will be charged with and what the punishment is if it is shown that he has actually participated in racial profiling. It goes into all of this about there's certain laws and everything that say that you can't do it, and and then if they find out that it's going on, then you gotta send a report to this other office, And then if they find out that there's cases where it looks like there's racial profiling, then they got to go in and they got to do some more training and all of this kind of stuff. So this thing really centers around a whole lot of training. It centers around a whole lot of funding, and you not being able to get your money, states not being able to get their money if certain things are not proven. It's a whole lot of little individual departments and organizations they want to use money to set up so that they can have citizen reviews and all of this kind of stuff. But this, again, it does not talk about any kind of specific charges or punishment for police officers that violate these different federal, state, and local laws and all of this kind of stuff. It does not talk about any specific crimes or punishment for anybody. But now remember, it's supposed to be holding police officers accountable. Okay, let's go to the next bullet point. Bans chokeholds, quartered holds, and no-knock warrants at the federal level, and limits the transfer of military-grade equipment to state and local law enforcement. Okay, bans chokeholds, corduroy holds, and no-knock warrants at the federal level. I just want y'all to get that at the federal level. It wasn't a federal law enforcement officer that murdered George Floyd with this corduroy hold. Now, if the states don't prohibit this stuff, if the states don't ban it and all of that, then they won't get their money. They won't get funding. But it doesn't say anything about punishing a state or local law enforcement if they do this, if they go against the ban. It doesn't say anything about how they will be charged with a crime and how they will be punished. So again, this is a bill with no punishment. No punishment whatsoever for law enforcement. No punishment for deadly force, the excessive use of force, police brutality, using these so-called banned chokeholds. There's no punishment. And nowhere in this bill, and I read the whole thing, does it say anything about any kind of punishment. Okay? Next bullet point. Mandates the use of dashboard cameras and body cameras for federal officers and requires state and local law enforcement to use existing federal funds to ensure the use of police body cameras. Body cameras. When all of that's supposed to already be a part of the state. But again, doesn't say anything about punishment for law enforcement on the state and local level that doesn't use body cameras. Doesn't say anything about punishment. Next bullet point. Establishes a national police misconduct registry to prevent problematic officers who are fired or leave on agencies from moving to another jurisdiction without any accountability. So it's just another database. Just another database. Where they list, whatever disciplinary action was taken against a specific police officer or law enforcement or whatever. And it's supposed to keep them from moving to another jurisdiction without any accountability. So yeah, we know that over here when you was working for this department, you had this number of complaints against you, and this was the disciplinary action that was taken or whatever. But we see it, we done read it, all right, but we still decide that we want to hire you anyway. Doesn't say that it prohibits them from hiring them. Doesn't say that it stops them from hiring them. It just says that it stops them from moving from one jurisdiction to another without accountability. So it doesn't change anything. They can still be hired somewhere else. Okay? Next bullet point, amends federal criminal statute from willingness to a recklessness standard to successfully identify and prosecute police misconduct. And what they're hoping that will happen in this case is the same thing that happened back in 1994 with with Biden's law, with the 1994 crime bill, is that because they're talking about offering all of these funds, you understand what I'm saying? All of these different programs that have these different funds. What's the name of these programs? Hold on, let me get to the name of these programs because I want you to know the name of these programs. You know, because there's two programs where they're offering money. Grants is what they call them. Hold on. Let me get to the name of them. Hold on, y'all. Yeah, because there's a whole lot of funding in here. There are authorized to be appropriated $100 billion to the Attorney General for each of fiscal years 2020 through 2022 to carry out this subsection. So I mean, it's a whole lot of money involved. But see, they can come up with all these money for these bills, but they can't come up with the money for our reparations. You know, all these grant programs and all of that. Okay, COPS, COPS, COPS grant program used for civilian review boards. Okay, and they throw around the NAACP and the Urban League and all of that kind of stuff. You know, as you know, money gonna go into them. I guess the money gonna go into them to set up all of these different civilian review boards and all that. But they don't have the right, or they don't have the authority to actually arrest and charge these police officers, even if they do find misconduct. Okay, that's one of the grants. One of the ways you can get money. The other one is this Brian somebody. Hold on, let me find it. Hold on, y'all. I'm still looking for it. This thing is long. It's like I said, it's a whole bunch of words saying nothing. Yeah, this part I want to read to you right here. Community-based organization. The term community-based organization means a grassroots organization that monitors the issue of police misconduct and that has a national presence and membership, such as National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the American Civil League, the ACL, the ACLU, the National Council of La Raza, the National Urban League, the National Congress of American Indians, or the National Asian Pacific American Legal Consortium. So again, this is about everybody. This is not just about black folks. This is about everybody. This is not specific to black folks, because if it was specific to black folks, the only thing we would have listed here would be the NAACP and maybe the Urban League. But you got the National Council of La Raza. That's the Hispanic folks. Then you got the National Congress of American Indians. That's the Indian people. And then you got the National Asian Pacific American Legal Consortium. That's the Asians. So see, this thing is for everybody. This thing ain't specific to black folks. Hold on. And then there's another section where it again lists all of those different police associations. You got the Black Police Association, you got the Hispanic one, you got the Asian one, you got the Native American one. So again, folks, understand this ain't nothing that's about black folks. I'm trying to find the name of that specific grant that this money is supposed to be coming from. But like I said, they can issue out all of this money, but they can't do nothing without reparations. They can come up with billions and trillions of dollars. You understand what I'm saying? To throw out all these stimulus packages and I think it was what $100 billion that they were talking about for the HR 6666, and now they're talking about $100 billion for this and all this, but they can't come up with the money for our reparations, which would basically solve our whole problem once they start talking to us about reparations. But let me find this other grant. It's the Bryant something. Hold on. Hold on, y'all. I'm getting there. It's Byron Grant Program, but that's not the name. That's not the full name. I got to find the full name of this because there's a full name of this grant program. Now remember, you got the COPS grant program, the COPS grant program, and it's another grant program. And I mean, this thing is long. This thing is long, and it basically says nothing. It's just talking about a whole lot of investigating. It's talking about a whole lot of setting up this body to look at this and that. It talks about a whole lot of passing information back and forth and setting up registries for information and all. But it says absolutely nothing about crimes and punishment for law enforcement. And remember, it's for everybody because it's got everybody listed. Not one time in this whole bill that I read did I see the word black. Lord, now if I didn't want it, it would be all up in my face. Grants to train law enforcement officers on use of force. Yes, it goes a whole lot into and this also has Eric Garner Excessive Use of Force Prevention Act. Yeah, it also has that section in here too. Chokeholds as civil rights violations. Now there's a crime where you can be convicted, but civil rights violation. Let me see. Come on now. I got to find this other grant. Because, see, this thing is all about money. Like I said, it's just a whole bunch of nothing saying nothing. And I'm going to leave a link so y'all can read all of this. Hold on. Let me go back to the top and see if I can find it that way. There it is. 1. Bond Grant Program. The term Bond Grant Program means any grant program under Subpart 1 of Part E of Title I of the Omnibus Crime Control and Safe Streets Act of 1968. Without regard to whether the funds are categorized as being made available under the Edward Bond Memorial State and Local Law Enforcement Assistance Programs, the Local Government Law Enforcement Block Grants Program, the Edward Bond Memorial Justice Assistance Grant Program, or otherwise. COPS Grant Program. The term COPS Grant Program means the grant program authorized under Section 1701 of Title I of the Omnibus Crime Control and Safe Streets Act of 1968. So those are the grant programs that all this money is supposed to come from. You understand what I'm saying? And if the states don't do certain things, if the states don't turn in certain paperwork and all of this kind of stuff, because that's all they're requiring, is that the states turn in this paperwork on time, that the states turn in, these numbers on time, that the states report to these different bodies on time. And if they do that, they can get the grant money. But again, this thing says absolutely nothing about any punishment. Any punishment for anything, okay? Now let's go back to the bullet points. Amends federal crime statutes from willingness to a recklessness standard to successfully identify and prosecute police misconduct. Reforms qualified immunity so that individuals are not barred from recovering damages when police violate their constitutional rights. So you can go in and the immunity won't stop you from suing a police officer in civil court. That's it. Doesn't change anything as far as their immunity from prosecution. It just gives you the right to go in and maybe file a civil suit against the actual police officer for violating your constitutional rights. Establishes public safety innovation grants for community-based organizations to create local commissions and task forces to help communities to reimagine and develop concrete, just, and equitable public safety approaches. Basically, all it does is, give money to shit that's already out there, like the NAACP and the Urban League and all of that, so you can form these little civilian review boards and things like that. But you really don't have any real power to affect law enforcement agencies, whether they be local, state, or federal. creates law enforcement development and training programs to develop best practice and requires the creation of law enforcement accreditation standard recommendations based on President Obama's task force on 21st century policing. So we're going to go back to Obama, the president that was there for 8 years and did absolutely nothing about police brutality. The president that was there on the watch when Trayvon was killed, when Sandra Bland was killed, when Tamar was killed, when Eric Garner was killed, when all of these different black folks were killed. The president that was there, he was right there. And him and Eric Holder did absolutely nothing. But we're supposed to go back to some of Obama's stuff when he was in president, okay? Now remember, development and training programs. So again, they're trying to make this a training issue. These cops are not trained right. Requires state and local law enforcement agencies to report use of force data. Disaggregated by race, sex, disability, religion, age. So again, all you got to do is report and send in all of these numbers and all this information, and you just keep getting your funding. Improves the use of pattern and practice investigations at the federal level by granting the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division subpoena power, and creates a grant program for state attorney generals to develop authority to conduct independent investigations into problematic police departments. So again, you're giving more power to the police to police the police and investigate the police. But again, you still hear nothing about punishment for any law enforcement that does not comply with these things right here. You ain't hear nothing about no criminal charges against them. You ain't hear nothing about no prosecution, nothing about no punishment, no nothing. And again, it's not specific to black people. Again, it's open for the Native American, the Asian American, the Hispanic American. It's open to everybody. Establish a Department of Justice task force, Lord Jesus, to coordinate the investigation, prosecution, and enforcement effects of federal, state, and local governments in cases related to law enforcement misconduct. So now the Justice Department have money to form a task force. Now they need a whole task force to help them investigate and prosecute law enforcement. The National African American Clergy Network supports the Justice and Policing Bill. Of course you do. It affirms sacred scripture that everyone is created in the image of... See, I don't want to hear that. So that's basically all it does. And I'm going to leave this link in the description box. And they have other links down here that you can go to. You can get the full text of the legislation. You can click here and go there. A section by section summary of the Justice and Policing Act of 2020. You can click and go there. A fact sheet on the Justice and Policing Act of 2020, and you can click and go there. But it's basically another trick bag, another nothing burger. It still does not talk about any punishment. You understand what I'm saying? Against police officers. Doesn't ban the military from selling militarized, military-grade weapons to the police department. Doesn't ban it. It restricts it a little bit. You understand what I'm saying? And then again, you got to go through filing all of these paperwork and filling out all these reports and turning these reports in and all that. But as long as you fill out your paperwork and as long as you turn in your reports and all of that, well, you can keep getting these military grade weapons for your police department. Be careful. So it doesn't ban it. So that's basically all that this so-called bill on justice in policing from the Democrats. That's basically all it's about. It's a whole bunch of words saying nothing. A whole bunch of words talking about setting up committees and talking about setting up advisory boards and talking about setting up investigations and task force and all of this. Doesn't talk about, like I said, any kind of punishment when you prove that a police officer has used excessive amount of force or excessive amount of deadly force, or what. Doesn't say anything about the killing of unarmed black. Well, it doesn't say anything about black folks, period. Because then, again, this is about everybody. There's even a part in here at the end where they actually talk about this anti-lynching bill. Let's go to that. And y'all got to understand, this thing is long. And it's long saying nothing. This is toward the end of it, where they go into this long spiel about lynching and all of this kind of stuff. And the lynchings that went on all these years against black folks and all this. This is the only part where it actually specifically talks about anything that has to do with black people. Section 403, lynching. Offense. Chapter 13 of Title 18 United States Code is amended by adding at the end the following. Section 250, lynching. Whoever conspires with another person to violate Section 245, 247, or 249 of this title or Section 901 of the Civil Rights Act of 1968 shall be punished in the same manner as a completed violation of such section, except that if the maximum term of imprisonment for such completed violation is less than 10 years, the person may be imprisoned for no more than 10 years. That's pretty much it. It does a whole lot of talking about body-worn cameras and dash cameras and all of this. But again, nowhere in this bill does it talk about any punishment against police officers who are found to have who are found to be guilty of misconduct, or who have found to have participated in the killing of an unarmed black person, or police brutality, excessive use of force, excessive use of lethal force. None of that. Doesn't talk about any kind of punishment whatsoever. So it's another nothing burger. A whole lot of words to say nothing. So I just wanted to come on here and let y'all know to not be fooled by that little show, that little act that they put on with them Kente Clothe and all of that. And you know, the fact that they got Kamala Harris and Cory Booker and Karen Bass out here in the front trying to push this thing and all of that. Just understand that this is another nothing burger. It doesn't say anything. Again, what we're at now is black folks are beyond. We are well beyond any kind of studies, any kind of reviews, any kind of data transfers. You know what I'm saying? Any kind of bans. We are beyond that. There are bans and all kind of laws and all kind of restrictions that are already on the books for these police officers that are committing these crimes. We want punishment. We want legislation that specifically, first of all, puts us in a protected class, along with the immigrants and the illegal immigrants and the LGBT and the white women and the Asian Americans. We want that specific protected class, and then we want punishments for these police officers who violate that protected class. We don't need to hear about the attorney general having the right to subpoena this person and to set up a special task force and to call for a special prosecutor and all that. We done seen all of that. But this bill, again, says absolutely nothing. First of all, it's not specific to us. And why anybody would think that a Democrat would come up with anything that was specific to foundational Black Americans is beyond me. So it's not specific to us, even though we are the ones that are suffering, even though we are the ones that are being targeted, even though we are the ones that are being affected by all of this police brutality and excessive use of force and excessive use of deadly force and all of that. So first of all, it's not specific to us. Second of all, it gives us no protections. It gives us no special protections. And third of all, it speaks to no punishment. No punishment whatsoever for law enforcement that does these things. Excessive use of force, excessive use of deadly force, killing folks and murdering folks that are unarmed. It doesn't speak to any of that. Doesn't speak to any of that. So I just wanted to come here and I just wanted to break this down to y'all a little bit. Like I said, the link so that you can read that whole entire long ass document that's saying nothing will be available in the description box. Just like the link that you can read what New York City is proposing, those different bills that they are proposing as far as police reform and all of this kind of stuff is concerned. All of these links will be in the description box. You can go read this stuff yourself and you will see. They ain't talking about doing nothing. They ain't talking about doing nothing to law enforcement. All they talking about is spending a whole lot of money to do nothing. And again, they can come up with all of this money to support all of these bills that are empty, that are nothing burgers, especially for foundational Black Americans. They can come up with all this money to support all of these bills, but they can't come up with our reparations. Anything other than to sit down and have that real conversation about our reparations and our tangibles. Now you have to understand, under the Civil Rights Act of 1964, we were supposed to be, Black folks in America were supposed to be a protected class, but they changed it to minority. And when they changed that word to minority, then they made it available to all these other groups. That's the reason why you have the LGBTQ community listed as a protected class. You have Hispanics listed and immigrants and illegal immigrants now listed as a protected class. You can't touch illegal immigrants. You can't touch them. They got all kind of special rights and privileges and special protections all over from the West Coast to the East Coast and back again. New York showed you how they felt about Asian Americans. When the corona thing hit, you had the Attorney General in New York State, that Letitia James woman, doing a whole hotline for you to call. And if you said anything to them or whatever, it was automatically considered a hate crime. So everybody has special protections. Everybody is listed as a protected class but us. And then we got all these immigrants. We got all these Hispanics. We got all these Asian Americans. We got all these folks coming over here, being protected and getting all of these benefits based on our 1964 Civil Rights Act. But then they have the nerve to try to talk shit about us. They have the nerve to come over here and get benefits that were meant just for us. And because our leaders didn't have sense enough or didn't have the wherewithal or guts enough or whatever to say, no, 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 don't stick that word minority in there. This is about black folks. It made it open for all of them people, but those are the people that want to try to talk junk to us. Billy Porter always up running his mouth and all of that. And the only reason why there are any hate crimes or anything like that and special protections for LGBTQ is because of our struggle, because of our civil rights work and our struggle. Because of the civil rights bill that was meant for us. Now white women get the protections and we don't. So you should never let an immigrant, anybody from the LGBTQ community, any Hispanic, Asian American, anybody talk any junk to you. Because the only reason why they have as much as they have is because of the work that we did. Because of our struggle. So understand there is nothing specific in any of this legislation that these people are tossing out to us. You understand what I'm saying? As bait, as carrots. So that we can get somewhere and sit down and calm down and stop protesting. You understand what I'm saying? None of this stuff is specific to us. None of this is about black folks. None of this is about the foundational black community and our issues with police brutality and our issues with being murdered in the streets. Unarmed black men, women, and children being murdered in the streets. Being murdered in police custody. Remember, Sandra Bland died in police custody. As well as all the black people that have been killed by these other groups. Who weren't police officers. George Zimmerman was not a police officer. Latasha Harden, I think that's the child's name, Latasha Harden, that Asian American woman shot her in the back of the head. That was not a police officer. Travis McMichael is not a police officer. So not only are we dying at the hands of police officers, we dying at the hands of every other group. Just kill us when they get ready. For no reason. But none of the legislation that I have read to you today is specific to black people. And none of it speaks specifically to our issue. So understand that Kente Clothe was just to reel you in and make you think that it was about you. These Democrats ain't looking after you. This ain't got nothing to do with you. This bill has absolutely nothing to do specifically with black folks. And I want to reiterate before I go. I want to reiterate again. We have accomplished more as far as opening up dialogue, as far as getting folks to move, even if they making symbolic moves, they making moves. Now, the next step will depend on us. The next step will depend on whether or not we're going to be satisfied with these symbolic moves. Whether or not we're going to be satisfied with all of this symbolic legislation, all of this empty legislation that they're proposing. You understand what I'm saying? To put laws on the books that are already there. They just go name them something else and put them on the books. Okay, laws on the books that they're already not enforcing. But we have accomplished more as far as opening up a dialogue, as far as getting people's attention, as far as making these people understand that we are tired and we're not going to accept anymore. We have done more of that in the last 2.5 weeks since the uprising started than we have in the last 40, 50, 60 years of voting. So understand, voting ain't going to change nothing. If voting was going to change anything, we wouldn't be here in 2020 where we were in 1962, 63, before the 1964 Civil Rights Act. We wouldn't be in the exact same place with the exact same issue. So don't let these folks convince you that voting is going to do anything for you, because it's not. You casting your vote is your way of saying, okay, I'm satisfied with the status quo. Okay, I'm satisfied with business as usual. Okay, we can just go back to doing things the way we used to do things. That's what your vote means. Your vote means, okay, I'll be a good house nigga and I'm not going to revolt. I'm not going to rise up. I'm not going to speak out. I'm not going to complain. I'm not going to say that anything's wrong. I'm just going to vote and go along with the program. That's what your vote means. Black folks at this point should not be participating in any voting process. Local, state, federal, period. Because they're still not offering us anything tangible. They're still not offering us anything that's specific for us. And they can offer everybody else specific stuff, specific rights, specific protections, specific tangibles. They ain't offering us nothing but words and symbolism. Get up off your knees. I don't need you to wash my feet. I don't need you to ask for my forgiveness. I don't need you to hug with me. I don't need you to march and protest with me. What I need you to do is I need you to give me my tangibles. No tangibles, no vote. It's just that simple. So I just wanted to come break this down to y'all, let y'all know what's going on. Like I said, all of this information will be in the description box. You can go, you can read it for yourself, and you can see that all of this shit is just empty. All of this is just empty. It's just another bunch of words. Tell them to go back to the drawing board and get it right. Tell them to stop coming to us with laws that are already on the books, and all the hell they doing is just renaming them. Just giving them another name. They're not enforcing the laws that are already on the books. If they were enforcing the laws that are already on the books, Amy Cooper would already be charged and in jail. They enforced the law that was already on the book for that white woman that was an attorney, that Stephanie Rapkin woman that spit on that little black boy. And they charged her and arrested her ass. If they would enforce the laws that's already on the books, hell, that would be an improvement to this bullshit that they're offering now. So y'all, please make sure you share this video. Please make sure you like this video. Please make sure, like I say all the time, you do not just have these conversations on social media. You have these conversations at home, among your family and your friends. If they don't want to believe you, point them in the direction of the shit that they can read themselves and see that this ain't nothing but a bunch of bullshit. Again, the Republican Party, the right, the Democratic Party, the left, are just two wings of the same bird, white supremacy. Again, white folks, I want to reiterate, white supremacy, that beast is going to have its lust for blood and violence satisfied. If it can't get it satisfied from its primary victim, which is black folks, well, it'll get it satisfied from dealing with you too, because white supremacy does not care. At the end of the day, white supremacy does not care. White supremacy just needs its lust for violence and blood to be satisfied. So understand, your white privilege only last as long as there are black folks for white supremacy to feed on. When they cannot feed on black folks, they'll feed on anybody else. Don't matter to them. Please subscribe to the channel. Please hit that bell notification so you can be notified when we upload videos. Please get into this description box. Look at these documents. Read these bills and all of this bullshit for yourself so that you'll know for yourself that it ain't nothing but a bunch of bullshit. And none of it is really meant to speak to the real issue of foundational black Americans in the United States as far as police brutality, as far as the murdering of black folks by police officers, by white supremacists, period. When I come back with y'all, I'm going to come back with y'all with the psychology of white supremacy. Y'all have a good day.